Hand drum song by Red Lake tribal member Fred Desjardins. Fred, come on up.
Good. Oh, bonjour. Indinaway maganidog wasamuganini indigenous cause. Makoy and do dame. Miskwa gummy aga ganing and dunjaba. So I'll just be rendering a song from Red Lake from a family up there that from the Defoe family. And I just want to honor that and mention that because these songs are important for us to remember where they come from and what their intentions are. So this song is just a bear song welcoming everything that we got going on tonight. So I'll share that with everybody and miigwech. So I hope. Language.
Miigwech, Fred. Wasn't that excellent? Let's give him a round of applause here. That was awesome. Bonjour, everyone. Megazins, Nindishenikas, Jangweshe, Nindudem, Madabimug, Nindunjiba. Little Eagle is my Ojibwe name. My family's from the Mink clan and the town of Redby. My English name is Dan King, and I'm president of the Red Lake Nation College, and also very honored to be one of the 7 hereditary chiefs of the Red Lake Nation. I'm very honored that my great-great-great-grandfather is our great, iconic, hereditary chief, Meidweganonen. So I wanted to first start out by welcoming everybody here today. We're at the beautiful Red Lake Nation Embassy right here near downtown Minneapolis. Is this a beautiful facility or what? Incredible, right? Yeah, so we're very honored that they would have us here and host us. And so we got a great event. And also, our friends and family are online on social media, and many of James' followers as well. So we welcome everybody online that's with us tonight. You're actually in for a special treat because we have tonight a special presentation by, as you know, James Vukelich, Kaagegaabaw, and he will be making a presentation later. But first, we have a few technical items we wanted to cover, and then also tell you a little bit about a news that's coming up with the Red Lake Nation College. So first, with the technical issues, we're going to have about a 1 hour and 40-minute presentation from James, and then followed by about 20 minutes of Q&A. And so everybody in the room here, please turn off your cell phones or your ringers. And then what you could do is, if you want to participate online, just type in any questions that you might have for the speaker later, Or if you want to make some comments during the chat, something you like, feel free to do that as well. If anybody's having trouble on Facebook, just switch over to YouTube. Just go to YouTube and type in Red Lake Nation College, and this event will come up. So we want to make it as user-friendly as possible for everyone. And then right at the end tonight, we're going to do a 1-minute survey. We're going to ask everybody to fill out based on what they saw tonight. So that's our technical announcements, but we wanted to also tell you a little bit about news going on with Red Lake Nation College. The first is that we got our 10-year accreditation. We worked on this for 10 years. It took a decade, but now we're a fully accredited college, just like the University of Minnesota, Notre Dame. Red Lake Nation College is in the same arena with those great schools. So I'm really proud of the fact that our tribe and our college achieved that tremendous goal. So that's the first thing. Secondly, we are now offering classes right here in Minneapolis. So Red Lake Nation College, Minneapolis campus, that's what we're starting now. We're offering classes. They actually start next week. We got Shailene, a lot of our team is here today. You can come down to the Minneapolis Embassy and sign up for classes right now. So if you know any friends or family, tell them about it. And it's a great opportunity to get a language and culture-based education from our tribe right here in Minneapolis. So we have about 8,000 tribal members here, and we want to offer that to everybody. But you don't have to be just a Red Lake member. Any tribal member can come here. Anybody who's not enrolled in any tribe can come here. So we are open to the public. And all you need to come to our college is a GED or a high school diploma. Also, we are a family college that we always like to say. So you're not just a number if you come here. You come to Red Lake Nation College and we treat you like family. Small classes, one-on-one help, just a lot of assistance. And I think one of the best things is you finish here with zero debt. So no debt at all. We don't offer student loans. We got a lot of financial aid, especially for tribal members and other natives. A lot of financial aid available. You finish 2 years with zero debt. In this country, the average 4-year debt for a 4-year degree is $33,000. So just think about that. You could come to Red Lake Nation College, get a language and culture-based education with zero debt. So that's a great opportunity that you have here right at our college. So the next thing I wanted to mention is our community education that this series is a part of. It's free education for anybody. And as we got this nice turnout tonight, a great turnout online. So we want to do these types of things regularly. And that's why we invited people like James, and we had Brenda Childs a few weeks ago. So that's what we're trying to do. So at this point, I will get the honor of introducing our guest speaker for tonight. And one of the things I love about this job is we get to meet people like James. And we've known James for about 3 years now. And he first came and did a board training for our college. And our friend Bill May, who served on the board, recently passed away. But Bill found James and said, we got to have this guy do our board training that we do every year. So we brought him in, and we've been great friends and partners ever since. That was the first time. Then the second time, we had him come up to Red Lake, and he made a presentation for our community. It was the biggest event we ever had up in Red Lake at our college. So we were very proud that our community just welcomed him in and learned everything that James was sharing with us. Just a great message. And then our third time is, right now. So we had him back again. So I think you're going to see, and a lot of the people who know James online already know how great he is. And what I love about him is it's a message of love, of hope. And really, this is what the Ojibwe language and culture and teachings are all about. It's this positive message that he spreads. And he doesn't just talk about it, but he actually does that in real life. When you deal with James, he's exactly like he is in his Ojibwe word of the day. So that's what I like. He's authentic, he's down to earth, and he's just a great teacher. So we're really honored to have him. So ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome James Vukelich, Kaagegaabaw. Thanks, Jen. Thanks.
Aho, Bonjour and Minobimaadiziwin. Anin, Kaagegaabaw Indigenous. Mikanak and Dudem, Mikanak Wajawing and Dunjaba, Besho Gakabakang and Danongom. Apichigo mi gwech bijayeg, Minoadash Ganawabamieg, and Gajaganishim Gaye. So I'll speak a little English as well. Hello, all of my relatives. My name is Kaagegaabaw. I'm Turtle Clan. I'm a descendant of Turtle Mountain. I live close to Minneapolis today, and I wanted to thank all of you for coming out tonight and for listening, for those of you who are online. I'd also like to begin by just saying, Apijigo Miigwech to Ogamadan King and to Misquagamiwi Zagaganeng Gabegakandaso to the Red Lake Nation College. They have shown me an extraordinary amount of generosity, kindness, and a great deal of love over the years. And it's always a pleasure whenever I have an opportunity to either travel to Red Lake or now visit with you all here at the embassy here in Kaagegaabaw, the place of the falls in Minneapolis. And tonight, I think we'll begin by discussing this concept that shows up internationally in Anishinaabe, this idea of 7 generations. For example, amongst the Haudenosaunee-speaking people, Deganawida, the great peacemaker, when he brought the great laws of peace to his people, he told them that in every one of your decisions, in every one of your deliberations, you are going to have to think 7 generations into the future. Now, the first time you hear that, it's very impressive. For me, it was a little confounding. How do we do that? How do we come up with a choice, a decision, an action that's going to affect someone we'll never see, we'll never visit with, we'll never listen to or hold? How do we affect someone 7 generations from now? And what I would love to present tonight is an Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, Chippewa perspective of that. So we'll start here. This first generation is Nin, I, me, myself. Here we have Nus and Ninga. Nus is our old word for my father. More contemporary Ojibwe speakers may use Ndede or Nababa. And for my mother, you may hear Namama as well, but these are our old words. Here's Nimishomis and Nokomis. And of course, being here in Minneapolis, we have Lake Nokomis. I lived just a few miles away from there for over 15 years. And our next generation is Indonako-Bichigan. Indonako-Bichigan. My great-grandparent, my great-grandfather, my great-grandmother. But it doesn't just mean that. It has in it this word part, this morpheme, unik. Now, unik means to be interconnected. It means to be interlinked. It means to be in a sequence. So I think an Ojibwe perspective of this idea of unik would be something like this. So if we translate that word, Indonako-Bichigan, it can mean my great-grandparent, my great-grandfather, my great-grandmother. It can mean my ancestor, someone who lived here thousands and thousands of years ago. I can refer to him or her as Indonako-Bichigan. But I think if we were to spiritually translate that word, it would mean that being I am inextricably interconnected to, that being I am inextricably linked to. And it's also a word for my great-grandchild. We use the same term for one another. So if we start at the top, here we have Nin, I, me, myself. I have Ngosis and Indonis, my son and my daughter. Nujis, Nujishayak, my grandchildren. And then I have Indonako-Bichigan, my great-grandchild, my great-grandson, my great-granddaughter. And if you look at this word Indonako-Bichigan, logically, the moment you use it, it implies 7 generations. Often, as an Ojibwe teacher, I'm asked, how do you translate the phrase 7 generations? And I think that's too clumsy for the sophistication and elegance in the language. For them, using this one term, knowing that it implies both my great-grandchild and my great-grandparent, immediately, in a moment, implies 7 generations. So what we have here is a model of 7 generations that are punctuated intergenerationally by this concept of I am inextricably interconnected to you. I am inextricably linked to you. And in this linking, we have past, present, and future that are totally interconnected. And if we look at this idea of 7 generations, there is this concept that shows up that the idea of I, me, myself, it may not actually exist. I am a link in the chain going all the way back, and I'm going all the way forward. I'm inextricably interconnected to all of my relatives. I am all of my relatives, and all of my relatives are me. Now, implied in that phrase is that every single action, not just that I'm doing, but that everyone in this room is doing, that everyone watching in line, every single word, gesture, step we're taking is affecting someone we'll never see, we'll never visit with, we'll never speak to or hold. Everything we are doing is affecting someone 7 generations from now. And so my question with this became, it was no longer why. That age-old question of human existence. Why am I here? Why was I born? We're here because we're related. We're here because we're inextricably interconnected. They always knew we would be here in 2021. My question was no longer why, it became how. How do I live in a way that can bring peace and balance to all of my relatives? How can I live without conflict with my environment? How can I live without contradiction, saying one thing and then doing another? And our ancestors have left us a way to do this. In Anishinaabe, we call this Minobimaadiziwin. The good life, a life of peace, a life of balance, a life without conflict or contradiction. And how do we lead the good life? The good fortune is that our ancestors have left us a way to do that. I think it should be pointed out too, that to lead a good life, the natural consequence of that is to also have good health. That was true wealth for our ancestors. And to do that, we have Kaagegaabaw. Another word I learned from the late Richard Morrison was the Kaagegaabaw. Kaagegaabaw would really mean the great law, the sacred law. It has Gitchi in it, great, Dib, to speak, in Akon, with a wood-like article in your hand. The Kaagegaabaw. Kaagege is eternal. In is a certain direction or a certain way, and Akon is with a wood-like article in your hand. The wood-like article that they're speaking of is the Vukelich. It's the pipe stem. It's the gift we were given to give thanks, to acknowledge all of our relatives, to ask for help, to pray, and of course to make relationships and agreements with other nations. And so the Kaagegaabaw, I think, could also be translated as the great law, the sacred law, but we also call these the 7 grandfather teachings. The Kaagegaabaw would be the eternal law. It's never been subject to change. It has always been this way. And maybe as we begin, we'll start probably where it's most proper, with ceremony. This first sacred law, descendent, humility, for me really comes to life with the Kaagegaabaw, the vision quest. Many people in the audience today probably know what a vision quest is, but If we go back to, let's say, the 1830s, you can imagine being a young boy, a child being woken up by your father in the morning. You're in the lodge, there's a fire burning, and he has two dishes. One has mijim, food, minan, berries, wias, venison, minomen, wild rice. And the other dish is a kakanje, charcoal. You're being presented a choice. Now, I think in the Matrix, this was the red pill or the blue pill. Here, you're being asked, would you like to eat or would you like to fast? And if you're a child and you choose the kakanje, the charcoal, the old man would mark your face with it several times. For the next 4 days and 3 nights, you'd go without food, go without water. You'd be isolated. You'd be seeking out a dream, seeking out a vision. Anyone who saw you with the soot on your face knew that they wouldn't offer you traditional hospitality. They would visit with you. They would offer you food, tea. You'd be left alone to seek out your dream. And I don't know if any of you have ever had to go without water for any certain amount of time, if you're fasting for either medical or spiritual reasons, but everything past day 1, I think gets very uncomfortable. I promised myself if I could, I would always have a drink of water. And you realize, and you ask yourself the question, well, where do I get my food from? Where do I get my clothing from? Where do I get my shelter, my medicine? If you're in the 1830s, that's all coming from the land. And right now he is learning the most important lesson in real time. What happens to a human being without food, water, clothing, or shelter? And he's learning this in real time. You will die. Human beings cannot live without these basic core human needs being met. And so he realizes that the awasiag, the four-legged, the beneshiag, the birds, the giguyag, the fish, and the mitigug, the trees, the mushkikiwan, the medicines, he can't live without them. They feed him, they clothe him, they shelter him, they give him life, they heal him. So he's learning to think lowly of himself. This sacred law, this grandfather teaching really means I think lowly of myself. What he's saying here is not that I have poor self-esteem. What he's doing is putting Anishinaabe where Anishinaabe belongs. I am not more important than the relatives who give me life. In fact, without them, I cannot survive. I consider myself less than. I am humble. You know, I heard a beautiful etymology of that word, Anishinaabe, from Nigaguns Minakani in Ontario. For them, they said it had Anisha in it, for nothing. Anishinaabe was the one who is nothing without the Creator. Another one was to be humble, the one who is humble before the Creator. And so he realizes that these animals, the fish, the birds, the trees that are giving him oxygen, that are giving him a lodge, that are giving him fire, the medicines that heal him when he is ill. It's the mushkiki. It's literally from mushkawazi, strength, and aki, the earth. When Anishinaabe is ill, he or she seeks out the strength of the earth for healing. And at that point, he realizes he has a relationship with each one of those beings. Now they've become relatives. They have become relatives through relationship. And so when you use a phrase like that, Minobimaadiziwin, what you're saying is, I'm addressing all of my relatives. And the moment he realizes that his food, his clothing, his shelter, his healing all comes from the earth, he treats it all with respect. Minobimaadiziwin, they respect one another. That word Minobimaadiziwin really means to go easy on. I use him or her sparingly, but I think in this case, when you realize that the animals have to die in order for you to have clothing and food, at the moment you harvest the medicine, it's no longer growing. That when you're cleaning your nets, they are all going, we go easy on them. We take only what we need and we leave the rest behind. And you know, this is a reciprocal word. Minobimaadiziwin. They go easy on one another. From an Ojibwe perspective, it's the animals, it's the water, it's our relatives who are going easy on us. They're the ones who are saying our younger sibling cannot survive if we do not take care of them, if we do not feed, clothe, shelter, and heal them. They will most certainly perish. We will go easy on them. I think another translation, a spiritual translation of this could be, I acknowledge the sanctity in my relatives. I acknowledge the sanctity of my relatives' lives. I acknowledge that they are sacred beings as well. So this is a respect that is based not on a submission to authority, but an acknowledgement of relationship with our relatives. Now, if you're a young child and you're fasting, maybe you ask yourself, well, who else does this for me in my life? Who else looks after me, gives me a home, feeds me, clothes me, gives me shelter, gives me medicine when I'm sick? Be my parents, my relatives, those people I live with. Why do they do that? Because they love us. Now, this word love, I don't think it's a definition. I think it would be more appropriately called a description of it. It has in it this word part, zog, to emerge. This is a friend of mine's Indian name, Kaagegaabaw. He or she comes from behind the mountain. Now, the person that's coming from behind the mountain here isn't a human being, isn't a relative. As we can see here, it's Gimishomasanan. It's our grandfather, the sun. Now, when the sun rises, who does the sun shine on? Everyone and everything. What we're seeing here is an example of what does the Creator's unconditional love look like for Anishinaabe, for human beings. And it has to be something like this. Here we can see Wenabosho, the sleeping giant in Lake Superior. And here we have the Zagibaga. This word, it means to bud. In Minnesota, we call the month of May the Zagibaga Gizis. It's the budding moon. And, you know, I have just the fondest memories of being here in Minneapolis. It is the beginning of May. You're walking along the boulevards. The days begin getting longer. It becomes warmer. The thunderbirds come. There are rainstorms. And all of a sudden, in one morning, as you're walking along the street, it seems as if all of the trees begin budding. Life comes emerging through all of them. And here would be an example of what does Zagibaga look like. This is mandamin, the wonder seed, corn. Now, when this seed comes to fruition, like it is in this month, this will feed a thief or a teacher, a priest or a prostitute. We're seeing here is the medicines and the foods example of what does unconditional love look like. There has to be something like this. As I've been doing this talk, I've realized that there's another word for love that I think is so important to discuss. It may be one of the most important spiritual terms we use. Shawenam. Shawenam. And this can mean 3 different things. And I know to some English speakers, this can be a little maddening or confusing, but it does in the language, it means to pity someone, to love someone unconditionally and to bless them. And there are some stories that I've heard that really bring this to life. One would be in the Iskagamizigegisis. It's the maple syrup boiling moon. It's where they boil sap to harvest maple syrup. And it had been a long, cold winter. We just had one here in Minnesota, with the polar vortex. And as that winter had gone by, the food stores had been eliminated. And as they were looking for food in the spring, a tree in a Natig told a hunter that if you were to make a cut in my trunk, I would feed you. At that time, it was pure sap. And it had everything a Anishinaabe needed to survive. Minerals. It had calories, most importantly. And so from that month on, they referred to him as Iskagamizigegisis. Another one that I love, it's the Minobimaadiziwin, the suckerfish moon. This is February. Again, this was a very cold winter. And when it gets this cold, some animals will hunker down, they'll burrow in, and they will wait until warm weather comes. It'll be about a month. They'll survive. But if you're hunting and gathering people, this can make life very difficult. And at this point in the winter, the food stores were practically gone. People began starving. They became buckade. I know nowadays we'll use that as hungry. He or she is hungry, but the way they used it back then, your face would become gaunt. Your lips would become dry. You're getting ready to perish. Your limbs become thin. And so they did what they were told to do. They did what their teachings instructed them to do. They asked for help. They used the asema. They used the tobacco. And one night a fellow had a dream where Namabin, the suckerfish, a bottom dweller, told him that if you were to set your nets underneath the ice, we'll swim into them. We will alleviate your hunger. And that's exactly what they did the next day. They were able to harvest the suckers, and they were fed, and they survived. From that month on, February has been known as Minobimaadiziwin. So to see that fish, even a bottom-dwelling fish, even a tree, they were the ones to take pity on us. The tree gave us its lifeblood. The suckerfish gave us their lives so that we could survive. They looked at these poor, starving human beings and had pity for them. It's a hard one to get across to some Euro-American, Euro-Canadian audiences that an animal or a tree would take pity on us. But they saw starving human beings, and it brought out pity. They showed us unconditional love with their lives, with their lifeblood, and in that we received the blessing of life. So when we use this term, Shawena, because I am all of my relatives, and all of my relatives are me, I wouldn't ask, just please bless me. Whatever is going to be good for my relatives will be good for me as well. In that prayer, they'll ask, Shawena Mishanam, Shawena Mishanam, Shawena Mishanam, Shawena Mishanam. Please bless, please pity, please love all of us unconditionally. And I've learned that, and I think maybe this is really important, that if you have people in your life and you want to tell them, I love you in the language, to leave you all with this message today would be Gizagi'in. Gizagi'in. You can also say Gizhawenaman. Gizhawenaman. And again, now we have an idea of that something eternal is emerging. It's for the benefit of all of my relatives. And that I love you. I love you unconditionally. I have pity for you and I want to bless you with my love. Gizhawenaman. Now you can also live this way too. Here we have Kijewatsi and Kijewatswin. He or she is kind. He or she is generous. This Kije part is really important because we have Kije Manadu. This is the old word for the creator. For Gichi Kije Manadu. It would be the kind spirit. It'd be the benevolent mystery. Manadu, it can mean both spirit and mystery. Something ineffable, something that is beyond definition. The language doesn't even attempt to define it. It just has a special category for it. And you can also be a Kijenabe. And I think this is really important. Young men from around the age of 19 or 20, in the beginning of their youth, they would, if they were to seek out to become a Kijenabe, to be a kind human being, what they would do is for the next 20 years, they would give away whatever they had harvested in surplus. They didn't hang on to it, they didn't hoard it, they gave it away. And there is always someone in need. Even in 2021, there's always someone in need. There's always an orphan, there is always a widow, there is always an elderly person who will need help. And these were the young men. You can also have Kijenabekwe, and young women who would, at the height of their power to harvest, to hunt, to produce traditional goods, would give these away. We get an insight in traditional Anishinaabe economy, where your wealth wasn't determined by how much you had hoarded, how much you held on to. Your wealth was determined, how much had I given to the community? How much had I given to all of my relatives? Now, if you can do that for 20 years, from about 19 to 20 to around 40, and you practice that, then you will become someone who cannot be purchased, you cannot be sold, you cannot be bribed. These would be the people who would be considered for traditional leadership because they had been looking out for their people for so long already. That's why in the dictionary, when you look that up, Kijenabe, you'll see a middle-aged man. If he or their family had done that for so long, that's what they were looked at. So we too can seek out this in our lives. And someone who does that, someone who is able to have that kind of love for their family, for their clan, for their community and nation, someone who is able to pray on relatives. This is someone where you would have this very special term, Ogechida, as well as Ogechidakwe. And that takes a great deal of strength of heart to be able to do that for your relatives. So the Ogechida was not just someone who fought against enemies. This was someone who did ceremonial work for their community as well, for the benefit of all of their relatives, not just for the benefit of themselves. And the people who are doing these ceremonies, I think it's had strong hearts. It'd be our next sacred law, Zungide Ewen, to have strength of heart, to be courage, to have courage, to be brave. I love that translation, courage, for this, because it has in it kur, heart, in Latin. To lead a life of heart. That's exactly what we're speaking about here in the language. Zungide Ewen. Here she has a strong heart. So this is the Dewa Egan. And these are Wanji Dewa Egan, Dakota drums. Now, how this drum arrives to the Anishinaabe, the beginning of this story is very dark, yet its resolution, I think, shows us the way on how to move forward in the future. And it's said that there was a Dakota village in the 1860s, late 1860s, maybe 1870s, that came under attack by the Chmokumanak, by the long knives, the Americans. That word long knife, it refers to the bayonets at the end of their rifles that they had at the time. And a woman, a Dakota woman, Wiaka Shintewi, tail feather woman, it said hid for her life in a pond nearby. She used a hollow reed to breathe through while she was underwater. She was there for 3 to 4 days. And while she was underwater, she had a vision. Wakantanka, the great mystery, told her that the spirit was very disappointed in how human beings were living at the time. And if you look at that era, there's a great deal of brutality going on. There's a great deal of warfare. And if you look at the Dakotas, for example, they were not just fighting with the Americans at the time, they were involved in a war with the Anishinaabe, with the Ojibwe. And we don't know how long that conflict had been going on. Maybe 100 winters, maybe 200 winters. And Wiakashintiwi, Tail Feather Woman, is told that if the Dakota were to present a drum to the Anishinaabe, that this would bring peace to both of their nations. Ultimately, she escapes with her life. She's able to flee to the nearest Dakota village where she relates her vision. And they begin creating the drum. The Dewa Igan. Look at what that word means. It means de, the heart. Way, the characteristic sound or voice, and Igan, the instrument. It's the instrument that makes the sound of the heartbeat. And when the Dakotas brought the drum to the Anishinaabe, and many people say this was at Mississauga at Lake Mille Lacs. When the Anishinaabe accepted it, they sat down together at this drum. When they were singing the songs they were gifted, they were speaking with one voice. When the drum was sounding, it represented both of their hearts beating together. And the smoke that was rising from the chanupa, from the opwagan, from the sacred pipe, from the medicines, the asema, the tobacco, the wingushk, the sweetgrass. Of course, the bashkode jibik, the sage, and the gijik, the cedar. And smoke represented their prayers and their aspirations for one another, raising to the Creator. And at this drum, two nations who had hated one another, who brought everything terrible war brings with it. Poverty, bereavement, rage, hatred, sorrow, were able to make peace with one another. Knowing that you can't lead a life of peace while you're at war. That'd be a contradiction. Knowing that I do no longer want to pass this down to the next generation who is coming. And we can attest that these drums are still played in Minnesota, in Wisconsin, and that the peace that they gifted to their children, to their grandchildren, to their great-grandchildren is one that has endured. I worked side by side with Dakota speakers, with Dakota teachers revitalizing our language, our history, our culture. In the immersion program I worked at Anishinaabe Academy, our classrooms were right next door to each other. And they must have known that for us to survive colonization, to survive the reservation period, to survive boarding school era, to survive things like termination, that we would need to be at peace with one another to do that. I think it's incredibly beautiful that when we needed healing, who did the Creator send but a woman with a drum? And, in that, I learned a different take on bravery, on courage. Before I thought of being a warrior, it meant I'm unafraid to go and fight and kill Dakotas. That's not what that meant at this point. It meant I am unafraid to call a Dakota a relative, to treat them as a relative. That no matter what happens, I shall never raise my hand to you again. And that takes true strength of heart. When these Ogichida and Ogichidakweg, these warriors are praying for all of our relatives when they're doing the pipe ceremonies, when they're at the big drum events. And it takes a great deal of strength of heart, because it's very easy for us to pray for our children, for our grandchildren, for our aunts and uncles, for our cousins, but they're also praying for people who are doing things that do not bring good health, that do not bring peace and balance to our community. And you need to have a strong heart to be able to pray for someone like that, to pray for all of them. And if you ask yourself, why are they praying for them? Why are they praying that for someone who may be trafficking narcotics, someone who may be addicted, someone who may be abusive, for them to pray that I'm praying for your peace and well-being. I'm praying that you all have good health. I'm praying that your thoughts and your emotions are in balance so that you may know true joy. I'm praying that you all walk along the path of life in a good way. If you can pray for them to do that, and if they did that, then they would not be partaking in the activities that are bringing discord and disarray in their lives, to the lives of their community. You need an absolutely strong heart to do that. Here's our next sacred law, Deboywen, truth. I'd love to go one moment into the language and into how I've been describing these sacred laws. I think our ancestors would look at truth this way: a verb. It is something that you do. Each one of these sacred laws we've been looking at is actually a verb. It's an action. It's something that you do. It's a way that you live. Every time we've seen a win at the end of it, it nominalizes it. It makes it a noun. But our language is something like 7/8 verbs. It acts, it feels, it relates. So for he or she to tell the truth, I've heard two etymologies of this. One came from the late Marlene Stately. For her, it was the day, the heart that we just spoke about in Dewa Igan, in way to speak. I am speaking to you from my heart. I am speaking to you from the very center, from the very core of my being. I'm speaking the truth to you. And I think that's a very appropriate way of describing the truth. Another one came from the late linguist Basil Johnson. He's an Anishinaabe linguist. For him, this was he or she speaks to the fullest extent. I am not omitting or I am not embellishing. I am telling you the truth without any additions. I am speaking to the fullest extent that I can. And there are times that there are lies by omission, or that there are embellishments. That's not what they're speaking about here. I'm telling you the whole truth. Which leads to our next sacred law: honesty, virtue, righteousness. Kaagegaabaw. A quick question. If you hear truth and honesty kind of next to each other, were you asking yourselves, aren't those kind of synonymous? They're kind of the same word in North American English, huh? You tell the truth, you're honest. If you're honest, you tell the truth. In the language, this doesn't have to do with what you say, it has to do with how you live.
How did you say it again?
Kaagegaabaw? Kaagegaabaw?
Why did he?
Yes. Here we have atsi, which is to live. And here we have guayak, right, straight, proper, correctly, in order, in alignment. So, and I think this will happen to everyone who is here today. Everyone here will have an experience with someone who tells them to act a certain way, to dress a certain way, to do a particular ceremony, to speak a certain way. Then you see them do something completely different on a Friday or Saturday night. If you are feeling attacked, don't. I'm talking about myself. Everyone has this. It's contradiction. In Latin, that's literally contra, against, and dictum, what you say. You're going against what you say. In Anishinaabe, honesty is how are you leading your life? Are your words in alignment with your actions? Do you walk the walk or do you talk the talk? And I think each one of us has had that example in our lives where we've done that. And I think to describe this, it would mean leading a life without contradiction, saying one thing and then doing another, but to lead a holistic life, a holy life, where my words, my actions are in alignment with one another. I think the criteria here for our ancestors is, if you want to see if I'm honest, observe how I lead my life. The truth will invariably come out. It always does. You can't hide that. And if you lead a life with Deboywin, with truth, with Kaagegaabaw, with virtue, with righteousness, with honesty, with descendent, where you don't exalt yourself above your relatives, where you are humble, where you think lowly of yourselves. You can do this with Minobimaadiziwin, with respect for one another, to acknowledge the sanctity in all of our relatives' lives, not just the human beings, not just our relatives, but all of our relatives. If you're able to do that, then you'll need Zungadeewin. You will need a strong heart to be able to do that. If you are able to lead that life, then every one of your actions will be intelligent. Every one of your actions will be wise. I personally think that this word means to have vision. It has this word part, wa, in it. And wa shows up in wasagan, lightning, wasamo, electricity. Wawate, the northern lights. Wabam, to be able to see. To lead a life of vision, to know that you are acting a certain way. And although you may not meet your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren, you most certainly will not meet their great-grandchildren, that no matter what you do, it will be positively beneficial for each one of them. And so, we know that we can't make anyone change. You can't do it. It's a fool's errand. It's an impossible task. On a personal note, I just celebrated 10 years of being smoke-free. And miigwech. And the reason I say this is that despite the people I hold most dear in my life that I truly loved and that truly loved me, and them harassing me to quit smoking, my family, my parents, my brothers, my beautiful wife, I wouldn't do it because of that. It didn't happen until I made the personal choice to quit. They couldn't force me to. They couldn't make me do it. But the moment I did choose to, it happened. I thought it would be difficult, and it became effortless. I put everything into it. I wanted to be free of that so bad. But I realized that it was me. I had to make the choice. I had to make the decision. And what I'm presenting to you all tonight is that if you are all of your relatives, and all of your relatives are you, you can't make your relatives change, but can you change yourself? And if you do change yourself, have you in fact changed all of your relatives? So as we seek out a way of leading a good life, a life of peace, a life of balance, a life without conflict or contradiction, a life with a holistic life, a holy life. If we're seeking out a way to do that, then we should seek out a life with truth, with honesty, with love, with virtue, with respect, with humility, ultimately with love and wisdom. So, please.
There's an animal assigned to each one. Can you do a quick on what each one is?
I'm not as familiar with that. I know the fellow who came up with that one. And I think it's more of a mnemonic device. I learned about them from his website on the Turtle Lodge. But yeah, and there's something very clever about that and also very traditional about it. Like, it may be difficult to get kids to remember all 7 of these, but can they remember Umik, the beaver, Muskade Bijiki, the buffalo, Ma'ingan, the wolf? They can remember those, and so it made it very easy for our youth to not just remember these teachings, but then to start embodying them and have an example on how to lead their lives. And with just a few moments left, I'd love to say, Apijigo miigwech bizindawiek. Thank you all so much for listening. Again, please feel free to reach out, and you can contact me at jamesvukelich.com. I'm sure many of you are probably familiar with the Ojibwe Word of the Day. You can find it there, but again, miigwech bizindawiek means thank you. Thank you for listening, and thank you for granting me your audience tonight. Miigwech.
So well.
I may disagree with you well, but especially with the Red Lake speakers who are so good. I didn't learn the language. I didn't hear the language until I was a 25-year-old man. I was originally going to be a French teacher. Isn't it zany? I had moved to Quebec in Canada. I did French immersion there at the University of Quebec at Trois-Rivières. And I came back to Minneapolis with every intention of being a French teacher. And when I went to, it's MCTC, but it was MCC back then. That tells you all how old I am. I saw Ojibwe was being offered. And my mom, my grandmother, they're Turtle Mountain Ojibwe. And I thought, well, I've studied French. I've studied Italian. I even studied a little bit of Latin in middle school. Why don't I try Ojibwe? And I recall going to Kaagegaabaw, Dr. Rick Greshik's Ojibwe class, and hearing the most fascinating story about myself I'd never been told. I had picked up this book by Maud Keg, Nawakamagukweban, Portage Lake. I opened up this book and saw a word, Ogiabajatunawan. And when you see it in double vowel, it took up most of the page. And I was like, who uses a word this long? What does this word mean? And it was the most, again, it was the most exciting intellectual, educational, philosophical, and spiritual journey I had ever come across, and it was coming to me from the language. And from there, I went all in. Despite having moved to another country to learn another language, I was like, all right, I'm going to spend as much time as possible learning not just the language, but also learning about myself. Learning about these teachings, learning about my spirituality, because actually looking around, this was probably your experience in school too. It had never been mentioned before. And you know, there's another important point here. If you're asking yourself why I hadn't heard the language until I was a 25-year-old man, my mother went to a boarding school. My grandmother went to residential school in Canada. And you know, these were total institutions. These were places where what you ate, the clothes you wore, the books you read, the food when you went to sleep, when you went to the bathroom, these were all determined for you by these institutions. And you know, my never having heard the language, that was not just my experience, that was my mom's experience, that was my grandma's experience as well. Those were two links in that chain from my great-grandparents to me that had been broken. And so, yeah, when I had a chance to learn the language, that for me it became very healing. And surprise, you know, it became very healing for my mom as well. Maybe one note, when we're saying we're inextricably interconnected, when we're saying we're inextricably linked, often we think, and I think this way because I was educated with a Western, in a Western educational system, where I'm just thinking about the future. What I didn't realize was that when I was healing, when I was learning the language, when I was learning the culture, I was also healing my mom too. I was healing my grandma. I was healing my great-grandpa, who was born in 1875, who saw the creation of the Turtle Mountain Reservation, who went through the oppressive religious and spiritual laws at the time, whose family structure was, you know, pretty much decimated by enforced boarding schools. So when we make these decisions, we have a chance to heal our relatives too.
Yeah, James, we had a couple more questions that came
Great.
from our online sources. And so I'll just kind of go through those, and just something to think about, James, as you get ready to, you know, in the last 10 or 15 minutes or so. If you could, right at the very end, we'll ask you, James, to give us one final thought on your presentation. So we'll let you kind of leave us for the night. But as he's getting ready with his little mic there, the first question is about respect and how respect seems to be built into the language, which I find really fascinating, you know, where it just seems to be part of that. How is that even possible? It almost seems like it's perfect to show humanity and love and kind and respect and all this, and it just kind of built into the language. Are other languages similar to this, or it just seems very unique that our Ojibwe language has that special feature. So I just wanted to maybe start off with that question. So.
Check. All right. Well, as I was learning the language, I went back to school after I had a chance to teach in the community and at the university. I started studying the morphemes, those small parts of the words that are in the language. And I think this would be a really important time to mention about passing this down to the generations who are coming. We'll circle around to that. I think having that built into the language, it is a 10,000-year-old investment in us. When you are an oral society with a very strong oral tradition, there's not a lot of written documents. There are the pictographs on the petroglyphs. There are the birch bark scrolls, but so many teachings were passed down orally that our ancestors, when I first started learning the language, I would ask fluent speakers, I would ask elders, I would ask chiefs and spiritual people, what would be the best way to learn the language? And they would say, it's already in you, but if you really want to know the traditions, the culture, the spirituality, it's all in the language. It's all in the language. And something that I learned in linguistics is that we are hardwired to speak as human beings. We speak and use language for the same reason that we can feel, that we can touch, that we can smell or taste. It's hardwired in our minds. Now, our ancestors' perspective is, if I put the teachings in the language and human beings speak, then this will be passed down generation after generation after generation after generation. How will I pass these down? I will put them in the language. What I don't think that they could have predicted, I don't think anyone could have, was the legacy of the boarding school era, a time when Anishinaabe did not use Anishinaabe Moy. And I don't know if this has been an experience for you all, like you learn about things like love, like truth, like respect, but when you really want to go in deep and ask yourself, what does this mean in my life? There are people, not just hundreds of years ago, but literally thousands of years ago, who have had our same experience, who have said that if I could pass something down to my great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren's great-grandchildren, what would I show them? I'd show them how to lead a good life, a life of peace, a life of balance, a life without conflict with their relatives or environment, a life without contradicting themselves. I'd show them Minobimaadiziwin. How will I do that? I will pass down these teachings in the language. And there are some other words that are just very beautiful that have respect built into them. One of my favorites is Mindimuye. Now, in English, this may sound like a dismissive term, an old woman, an old lady. In the language, I believe it has minj in it, to hold. And the uye is the being. So when we speak of an old woman in the Ojibwe, she is the one who is holding our families together. She's holding our clans together, our communities together, and ultimately our nation together. And if you look at your grandmas and your great-grandmas and the role they played in your family, then you can see that taking place. The Akiwenzi as well, the old man, is another favorite of mine. It has in it Aki, the earth, in Wenzi. He comes from the earth. By the time you become an old man, and you think of like the Gete Anishinaabe, the old-time people who got their food, their water, their clothing, their shelter from the earth. He realizes at the end of his life that the earth has fed me, clothed me, sheltered me. I am the earth, and the earth is me. Whatever I do that affects the earth will affect me. Therefore, we have in this built-in respect for our relatives, for the land, for the water, of course, that's giving life to all of us. And
beautiful. Thanks, James. Yeah, that's like what you're saying is the language has that stuff's all built in there and passed down to us. So a lot of our solutions in life, and even today, the answers are right in the language. So that's pretty amazing. You know, that's deep. Here's another question from online. Somebody asked, Hello, how hard is it for someone to learn the Ojibwe language from the very beginning? Any learning tips? Miigwech, they ask.
Hard is relative. However, there can be varying degrees to which you'll learn the language. I think that I learned from one language teacher that even if you don't become a fluent speaker, that if you were to use some words, if you were to learn what those words really mean, if you were able to have like a brief conversation with friends, with relatives, especially if you have an Ojibwe speaker in your family, to be able to share a few words with them can be a very rich experience. As far as learning the language, we're lucky we have a number of resources that are available online. When I started learning the language, we had Kinko's copybooks and cassette tapes that I would play and listen to on my Walkman or this little cassette player, and maybe get my copies from Kinko's. We have a whole bunch of resources online. The Ojibwe Native Journal, which is at Bemidji State University, is an outstanding resource. I love to plug that. There are a number of stories that were recorded, digitally recorded in Ojibwe that you can listen to, and you can also read along with a translation.
Say that again, please.
Ojibwe Native Journal, or ONJ. If you type in ONJ Bemidji State, it'll show up. And now that's available for free online. When I was learning the language, again, it came on cassette tapes and published books. So that would be one. Another one is checking out resources available in your community to learn that dialect. One of my favorites was going to a school where they teach the Ojibwe language. So, to acknowledge Red Lake Nation College, when I had a chance to visit their Ojibwe language department, which was outstanding. This is another opportunity to learn the language. So,
Here's another question from online. The last one was from Yuan from YouTube, the last question. This one is from Tom on Facebook. It said, where do you teach?
I kind of just teach on Facebook right now, especially since 2020. The most curious thing happened. I was teaching and toiling away kind of in obscurity here in Kaagegaabaw, here in Minneapolis. There were a couple of language tables that I taught at. I was also the Indigenous language specialist at Minneapolis Public Schools. Before that, I taught in an immersion program, as well as at the University of Minnesota, but there were maybe two or, in some cases, like 2 or 3 people who would show up for our language tables. And then I started doing, word of the day online on Facebook at my wife's suggestion. So all of this is because of her. It was like, you should get online and try this new Facebook Live feature. And I thought, okay, I'll do it. And from there, it transformed, and I had a chance to travel and also to do teaching online, which was really cool.
The last I knew you were working with the Minneapolis School District. So.
Yes.
Geez, if I'd have known that, he should be working at Red Lake Nation College. Huh? All right, I was going to ask if anybody in this room, the live in the room, or in the overflow room, does anybody have a question in this room?
How did you say the budding?
Zagi Baga. Zagi Baga. Zagi Baga. And that moon is the Zagi Baga Jesus. It's the budding moon. May. Although, kind of with climate, it's becoming more like April, isn't it? At least in Minneapolis it was. The budding moon. Miigwech Kagin. Please.
What is the Ojibwe word for goodbye? That was my favorite, and I forgot what it is.
Did everybody hear that online? She asked, what is the Ojibwe word for goodbye?
And I love this one. This was one of the first ones I learned in the language in first year Ojibwe. We don't actually have a word for goodbye. Isn't that wonderful? It's always Gigawabaman. Gigawabaman. I'll see you later. But literally, I'll see you in this life or in the next. So it's never really truly goodbye was what my teacher taught me. Please.
Another thing that's really honorable about our language is that we don't have no cuss words in it either. So I think that's just awesome.
It's true.
Did everybody hear that online? She mentioned that how it's a beautiful thing that we don't have swear words in our language.
It's also hard to, blaspheme or take the Lord's name in vain. So when you think about how they thought, those words weren't there. It's really remarkable.
Yeah, that positive energy is just in there, right? So we got to find ways to go around that. They're just because it's not there in Ojibwe. Another question?
You're in the for all the relatives like mindset on the day-to-day. Does one necessarily want to spend a lot of time invested in thinking about what previous generations did in your decisions for generations in the future, both good and bad?
Isn't that so?
Could you repeat that for the audience, James?
When we're looking at this concept of we're all related, Gedinawaindaman would be how we would conjugate that as a verb. We are all related. We inclusively. On the day-to-day basis, to think about how your ancestors' actions may have affected you today. Is that fair enough? And we see that. We see that in a longer version of the talk I give. I like to talk about inherited trauma. You know, when I was speaking about my great-grandfather's experience, there's that idea of Indonako Bichigan. I'm inextricably interconnected to him. How was his life affecting me? Affecting the way I see the world, affecting the way I make my decisions, how I relate to all of my relatives. And he went through a great deal of change in 1875. Again, there were probably periods where he slept in a teepee as they were traveling from the Cypress Hills in Canada to Turtle Mountain. He goes through a period where he is, this will sound strange to some people who are watching, but speaking the language the way I did tonight, in his day and age, that could have been an arrestable offense. To smudge with the sweetgrass like I did before I gave this talk, to lose your family, to have your children be compelled to go to a boarding school or a residential school. And, you have people today who did not have that experience. For me, I had a chance to actually learn the language in school. That would have been unheard of in his day and age, that I can practice my spirituality without any fear of repercussion since 1978. But we have people, I think this is important to talk about. We have people who may be using opiates or methamphetamine, people who are engaging in unsafe sexual practices, maybe chronic overspending, maybe gambling, maybe internet addiction. And sometimes I ask myself, I wonder if they are dealing with someone's pain that is not their own. Someone's pain that they may have inherited, their grandfathers, their great-grandparents, even their parents' experience. And I think it's important to acknowledge that the moment you realize you may be feeling someone else's hurt, someone else's suffering, that can be a catalyst for healing. The moment you make that decision to change, you are choosing to not pass that down to your children, to your grandchildren, and to your great-grandchildren. So the holistic point of view of we're all related is that someone's actions may be affecting the way I view the world. If I'm not aware of that, if I'm ignorant of it, I will just pass that down. without pause. And I'm really, it's something I'm very impressed with this generation. Having had a chance to travel to a number of communities, I've met a number of families who have decided that, the buck stops here. Intergenerational trauma stops here. I am passing on the good way of living to my children and to their grandchildren and to my great-grandchildren. That's the example they'll see from me. And so.
That's great. We have another question in the room.
Hi, Muriel Dickinson, the director of the Red Lake Nation Embassy. You talked a little bit about Big Drum, and I know that a lot of the teachings are at the Big Drum. My father was a participant in very high, almost to the shaman status of 50 years. And he passed this past year in July of 20. And he always used to say, come to Big Drum, which I have, one of my siblings is going on about 20 years. And that teaching at Big Drum is very strong. And so your traditional ways are taught and learned at the Big Drum. So what is your experience? You talked a little bit, you mentioned Big Drum. So what did you take from, and are you still continuing to go to Big Drum? And if you aren't, then, that's where we should all, in our life, at least try to make an effort to visit Big Drum somewhere in our life. And I think you can find ground. When you had talked about the addictions, the opiates, the whole historical trauma is still with this generation.
Yes.
And it's passed down. And it's going to continue until you decide. And we're all keepers of our people. Mm-hmm. And I feel like there is some responsibility for us yet still today. And so I just wanted to make that comment and ask you about Big Drum, your experience.
First, aside from having gone a few times, I don't belong to a drum. I do know that where these drums are, they've brought a great deal of support and strength to their communities. And I do believe that there's healing there. I think it's remarkable that since the 1870s, people getting together and playing these drums, or in being at ceremony, and acknowledging that treaty, that Indigenous treaty with the Dakota and the Anishinaabe, like, how remarkable is that? That has been taking place for so long. And that's been a source of strength and healing for the communities. And so, but as far as responsibility, there is a great Gete Buanaban, Jimmy Jackson quote that I heard. And he said, it's not a privilege to be Anishinaabe. I'll have to quote it. It won't be verbatim. It's a responsibility. The moment you realize that you are related, not just to all the humans, but to the animals, to the trees, to the water, to the fish, to the birds, then you become responsible for them. And then that question will become, well, how? How do I do it? Seek out a good life. It has worked for thousands and thousands of years. It will continue to work for us now.
All right.
Maybe just add one more comment to that as well. In that, the Big Drum, the process, the women have a lot of power there. And there's a lot of responsibility and respect
Indeed.
Within that circle. And so I would advise anybody, if you're ever honored to go to a Big Drum ceremony, go. And it enlightens you, and you feel like you have done your part, or at least you're on your way to try to heal yourself and other people around you. Chimigwech.
I've had an opportunity to meet Ogeechidakwe. Often you think Ogeechida is just male, but no, Ogeechidakwe would be a female warrior. And this Mindamuye was surly, and she looked after one of those drums. And she determined when that drum was played, who sat there. She had a great deal of authority with that. And when you think of that word, Mindamuya, of someone holding the community together, she was a perfect example of that, looking after the well-being and the health of her community. Yeah.
Thank you, James. Appreciate that. All right, we have several more questions still online. We're going to try to go about 9 more minutes, and then we'll get to the point where James wraps it up. But here's several questions. Shane from YouTube said, how do you say I miss you in Ojibwe?
Ingwina Wainaman. I miss you.
And here's another question from Anonymous Elephant. It says, hi, James. Thank you for the amazing presentation. What do you think should be done to provoke more interest among younger generations to learn the Ojibwe language?
It's a great question. It's a really great question. In the closing of my talk, I said, you can't make anyone do anything. And I think sometimes as parents, as grandparents, as aunts and uncles, we can try to do that out of love for the people we hold very dear. Like, you will want to know this. You will need to know this, but you can't make them learn it. And I think our perspective of it has to be to present it to them in a way that they can approach it on their own terms, that they will have the chance to learn at their own discretion and at their own pace. Having worked as an Ojibwe educator for over 20 years, I felt terrible about how many people were left behind who didn't want to learn Ojibwe at school, who didn't want to learn in a classroom setting, who didn't want to have a teacher asking them questions, quizzing them, making them speak in front of a group of people and making mistakes in front of a group of people. Having learned a couple of languages, you will make mistakes in front of a group of people. That is just part of it, and that's hard. We also have a long and complicated history with school that we're working on, with having our own schools, with having our own colleges, with having our own places of learning. That may be the teaching lodge, or that may be the Kaagegaabaw, that may be the college. But I think to be genuine about it is to present it to them in a way that's approachable, in a way that doesn't provoke stress. And as a language teacher, one of the things I'm most grateful about not being in a classroom is like never having to give another grade for learning the language, because that it's disheartening. And there are so many people out there who I think would be better served with more innovative ways. It's been something that's been interesting about the pandemic and about online learning. There have been a number of free online classes, which attendance has been great. Participation has been wonderful. And it's because people can be in the comfort of their own home. They can approach the language at their own leisure. They're not forced to be somewhere at a certain time. They can practice at their own pace. And, I think it gave a lot of people comfort during this, what's been a very, very, very distressing and stressful year and a half.
That's a great point,
James, because here at the Red Lake Nation College, we found that most of our students who come in, they've had 1 or 2 or 3 other higher education institutions, and they haven't had good experiences, whether it was K to 12 or higher education, but they come to our college and we have the 7 values that we incorporate, and that really does work. It makes a big impact where we're trying to overcome those past bad experiences. And like when you said that about the grades, that really hit home, because we see that every day with the students where they're kind of traumatized by the past experiences they've had in the traditional education system. So, which is why I think the language and culture-based education that we provide is really something they can't get anywhere else. So I would encourage everybody to tell their family and friends, all you need is a high school diploma or a GED and you could go to college. If you're a Red Lake member or other member of another tribe or not even native, you could come to our school and do that. So I would encourage everybody to reach out to us. Here's another question. Soraya Labine from Facebook. When you smudge your home, do you always use the 4 medicines?
It depends. You know, last night I did. I think that's curious that you know that. And everyone's probably had this experience. You know, I lost a relative to COVID, and then I saw last night on social media another old-time friend had passed away. And so at that point, I used all 4 of them. Often I like to use wingashk though. I use sweetgrass, and that's just my own personal preference. It's what my ancestors at Turtle Mountain, Minobimaadiziwin, would have used. So.
All right, Miigwech for sharing that. The next question was, what is the longest word in the Ojibwe language that you are aware of, and how many letters does it have in it? Tammy from Facebook asked that.
No, I haven't counted it. It's up there. Do you guys mind if I say it? Mini bashki minasigani batuyen gwesichigani bakwejigan. Blueberry pie is the one I know. And I don't know if you know how I learned that. The late Ona Kingbird, Minobimaadiziwin. When I was studying at University of Minnesota, Heart of the Earth School was just down the street, and I would see her around, and I'd always say bonjour, and I'd engage her in the language. She was just surprised about that. And then one day she had a group of her Ojibwe students with her, and one of them said, say blueberry pie. And I'm like, oh, I'll try. And I whiffed it. I whiffed it in front of all these kids. And I tried again, and finally Ona was just like, it was just like, you're a young student, you're trying to learn, and that was a pretty hard one. So I was like, all right, I think this is the 80th time I've been asked to say blueberry pie. I went home, I got out Dr. Nichols' dissertation, I found the citation for Mini Bashki Minasigani Batuyan Gwesichigani Bakwechigan, wrote it out syllable by syllable, and started practicing it, saying it backwards. And for the next 2.5 hours, if anyone were looking in my house, I would have looked like a madman. I was walking around talking to myself, looking at this long piece of paper. I had to have it landscape because it was so long, saying this word over and over and over again, and that's how I did it. That's how I learned it. I don't, I think 27. So it's good.
All right, we got one more question, and then at that point, we'll allow James to make a final thought on the presentation tonight. But this is from Gigig from Facebook, and he's asking, how would one say, I wish these words to be heard as I thank my ancestors for their sacrifices that have blessed me. That's a great thought there. But he's asking how to say that.
All right. That was kind of long.
And again, he said, here's what he's trying to say. I wish these words to be heard as I thank my ancestors for their sacrifices that have blessed me.
Right. Well, that I have been blessed with, Apijigo Miigwech, Shoena Maguyan. Thank you. I have
Yeah,
been
that's
blessed.
it's a female.
I have been blessed. And that's how I say it.
All right, Miigwech. And while we'll let James kind of get ready and get his thought together, I just wanted to say again to James Miigwech, and you can see why he's an internet star. He can look at the camera and talk to you, and he makes you feel like when you're sitting there watching at your computer, like he's talking to you personally, right? And all those people who are like stars on the internet, they have that gift to be able to do that. And it's really hard to do because you're looking at a camera, but he makes you feel like he's talking to you personally. That's why he has so many followers. So, but anyway, I just wanted to say, Miigwech James, it's always great to have you here. So we'll let you close it off with a final thought.
Another one I would use for that, Miigwech. Truly, I have been blessed. Truly, I have been pitied. Truly, I have been loved unconditionally. You're not stating by a particular person, too, with that. You're also saying then, the Spirit has blessed me that way. That's so not just my ancestors, but all of my relatives and the Spirit. And in closing, to say that we are our decisions as human beings, it's too narrow of a scope for human beings. We're all of our relatives. All of our relatives are us. However, I think we do need to acknowledge that all of our decisions are important. And although we may not know it, our decisions are going to affect people we will never see, we will never visit with, we will never listen to or hold. I think during the pandemic, we've really seen how people's decisions can affect people they may not even know exist, how their actions and their choices have affected all of their relatives. We've seen how people in Asia, in Europe, North and South America have affected one another. And so, in closing, as we're making decisions that will affect people, not just in the present, not just in the future, but also an opportunity to heal the relatives who are no longer with us. When you seek out a way to change your life, to change the way that you live, I think that would be the closest way to say decolonize in the language, but it's literally to change the way I live. You'll be asked the question, how? How do you do it? How do you live this way? And the way that's always worked, the way that will work in the future, is again to seek out a life with Debwewin, with truth, with Kwakwatizuin, with virtue and righteousness and honesty. A holistic life, life without contradiction, a holy life. With Zagiyatdiwin, with that compassionate, unconditional love for one another. With Dabasaindizuwin, to say that we are not more important than all of our relatives, but we think less than ourselves. I do not exalt myself above my relatives. I'm truly humble. With Manajiduwin, to acknowledge the sanctity, the sacredness of all of my relatives' lives, to truly respect them, to go easy on them. With Zungideewin, we will truly need strength of heart. We will truly need to be brave to seek out that life. And if we do, we'll ultimately act in a way that's positively beneficial for all of our relatives, past, present, and future. We'll act with wisdom. We'll act with vision. We'll act with Nibwakawan. And on that note, I would like to say, Ando Minobimaadiziwin. Let's all go out and seek out a good life. Not just for ourselves, but for the benefit of all of our relatives. So, that's all I'll say. Thank you all so much for listening.
Great job. Was that tremendous or what? Let's give him another round of applause there. Right. And all right. Very well said. Miigwech. Before everybody leaves, if we could have that VR code, if everybody could use your phone, and there's a little survey on there for us. And we use this as part of feedback for our community education. We try to make everything better and improve. So if you could give us, it takes 1 minute to fill out that survey. So it's really easy. So if you put your phone on there and then a survey will pop up, If you could do that, we'd appreciate it. We'll share that with James and his group. And so we always want to make these better and improve on them every time. So if you could provide that, we'd appreciate it. And once again, miigwech for coming tonight. Thank you all.